I'd felt completely invincible crossing the finishing line. Yet a few weeks later I was told I had advanced bowel cancer. Really, our tendency is to then think, why me? Well, being young, fit and strong aren't reasons to think why me, they're actually reasons to think why not me. It's very odd sitting in a chemo chair, rigged up to the drips and thinking, that's poison that they're sticking in me now. You are faced with your own mortality. There was a period of about 5 days when I didn't know if it was terminal or not. And suddenly you realise how short and precious life is.
Felicity Ashley, welcome to the Lifecraft Conversations. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Your book made me cry, by the way.
Oh, I mean, I have to say I welled up writing it quite a lot. And certainly when my mum and my sister read it, because they read it before it was published, there were quite a few tears, yeah. But I think that's because it's a very personal story, and, a lot of it's about family and, love and loss and all the rest of it. So it does tug at the heartstrings, definitely.
You call yourself Mother, Mariner and Motivator.
Yeah.
And you like alliteration, don't you? Stronger than the storm.
It does appear, well, maybe that's the marketeer in me, yeah.
You were originally a marketer.
I was, yeah. And in fact, my story, so I then transitioned from marketeer to speaker, now author. But once a marketeer, always a marketeer. You can take the girl out of marketing, but you can't take the marketing out of the girl. And so I suppose that discipline is still in that, it's still with me. And actually it's very helpful in terms of forging a new career to understand how to market yourself and how to put your best foot forward. So I think my USP now really, and what I'm doing as a professional speaker, is my ability to understand the audiences I speak to, and on the whole they're kind of corporate audiences, because I've lived that, I've lived what they're going through, I've experienced many of the challenges that they might be going through because of 20 years of doing it myself. And so I think what I do now is bring the best of my past life, if you like, with the more recent experiences that I've had of kind of, living through different adventures and adversity, as you know from the book. So I kind of bring both sides of that together now into what I do.
A family of 3.
3 children, yeah.
And you were the middle one.
I was.
Did that
troubled middle child, but not really.
Did that make you stronger? Did you lose all your toys?
I think it does make you stronger, and I talk about that in the book. I think, I was born with this in a competitive environment, competing with my siblings, one older, one younger. Siblings can be mean to each other, so it inevitably gives you, a bit of a steely coat sometimes. But equally, it gives a sense of, you brought up valuing connection and community and having people around you who might be mean on one hand, but equally, that deep down they'll have your back. And then actually being able to go and row the Atlantic with my sister was so special, because we fought like cats and dogs as teenagers, as, siblings of the same sex who are close in age inevitably do. But then, in adulthood, we've become incredibly close. And then to be able to go and share an experience like rowing across the Atlantic for 6 weeks together was so special, and really did strengthen our bonds, and I suppose reminded each other of who we are deep down. And I never take that for granted, because you see so many examples of families that have disintegrated for one reason or another. And it's an absolute blessing, I think, from our family perspective, that we all not only get on, but we choose to spend time with each other, and the next generation choose to spend time with each other. So the cousins, we've got, my sister and brother and I have got 10 children between us, and they all get on absolutely brilliantly and would choose to go on holiday together. And I think that's something that my parents have always really treasured, the fact that their children want to spend time together. But as I say, it's something that we don't take for granted. No. Because it doesn't happen all the time, and it's something that I absolutely value. And I think it's one of those things, having that strong sense of, family value and community is definitely something that shaped me through life. And we were on holiday in West Wales, and my older brother, who's 2 years older, James, had gone off on his bike with some of his friends, his male friends, and I didn't want to get left behind. And again, this is probably that competitive sort of younger sibling thing going on. So I decided to hop on my bike and do my best to follow them, but I wasn't very proficient on my bike at the time. I don't know how old I was, but I wasn't very proficient. And they were going across the fields, and I followed them, but soon got wildly out of control, and it was all I could do to hang on, but I couldn't steer and hang on, and I ended up falling into a massive sort of pit of stingy nettles with my bike on top of me and very much licking my wounds.
But you said in the book that was somehow a kind of defining moment.
It's about that sibling thing. There's definitely wanting to keep up with the people around me.
Yeah.
But it's also competing against myself, wanting to do the best of my ability, and wanting to challenge myself and push myself. And I think that's something I've become more aware of over the years, that when I do have a challenge on the horizon, it's what makes me feel alive, and it gets me up in the morning. And it's only when I take something new on that I realise I've missed that, if I haven't had that. So recently, having come back from Nepal and doing the world's highest marathon, when I took that challenge on, I realised how much I'd missed not having a challenge in my life since the Atlantic Row, or not having that kind of physical challenge to push myself since the Atlantic Row. So I think it's something that almost I feel like I need more and more as I go through.
Yeah. I remember you saying somewhere that you actually, when you're enduring pain, there's a masochistic thing about you want more, bring on more pain so that I can climb even higher. There was some kind of thing, story you told, I remember.
In some ways, so for example, the Atlantic Row, we knew it's billed as the world's toughest row, so we expected it to be really, really hard. But I think there was also an element of wanting it to be really hard. And had we not experienced the big wild weather conditions of the Atlantic that we did, particularly in the second half, I think we would have felt cheated that we hadn't had that full Atlantic experience. And it was something about wanting to experience the really tough times to push us to our limits, to prove to ourselves how resilient and capable we are, or we were. And if you don't experience those tough times and the pain, you never know how far you can push yourself. So I think there is something that deep down makes me want to go to those depths and to really stretch myself, because otherwise you never know.
The full Atlantic experience. It sounds like a kind of, it's like a course you go on, and you will enjoy the full Atlantic experience.
I do. I think I do describe it as being like, the world's best training course. 6 weeks in a small boat with people that you don't normally spend that length of time with. It teaches you such a huge amount. It's a crash course in all sorts of things, from resilience to communication to teamwork. There are so many lessons to learn in that environment that you could never get from going on a corporate training course.
No. What's the biggest? So to carry on that point, what then is the biggest difference? So why is that not replicable? Why is this different? I
suppose it's the extremes of the conditions and the environment that you're putting yourself into, and the unpredictability of it. I mean, yes, business can be unpredictable, but not in the sense that, being at sea, being in the middle of the Atlantic is unpredictable. You might have flat, calm conditions one day, and then overnight a massive storm can build up, and it's almost like you're in a completely different place in the world. Things go wrong, and it can be a matter of life and death, and you're having to deal with those in the moment. And I don't think you can simulate those conditions in business. It's rarely a case of life and death. Certainly in the businesses that I've worked in, it's not a case of life and death. It may feel like that sometimes when you've got the pressures of achieving goals or projects that go the wrong way. But it's rarely that kind of extreme situation where you have to make life and death decisions. And those are the kind of things that we were facing.
Yeah, you don't usually die on corporate training course.
No, that would be a terrible result. Yeah, so I had done quite a few triathlons through my 30s and other kind of what I now call mini endurance events, at the longest single day endurance events, but nothing on the scale of the Atlantic. And at school I'd enjoyed sport and thrown myself into lots of different sports, particularly rowing. I did a lot of horse riding as well outside of school. But I would say I was always decent. I always had a good go, but I never excelled necessarily in any of them. I'm not very big, so I'm never going to be the fastest, never going to be the strongest. But I think what I learned through it all was that I can keep going. I've got endurance, and I will give it everything, give it 100%. And so probably I punch above my weight potentially, because of, and that's probably because of that attitude and mindset and a willingness to work really hard. And that is something that definitely took me into the Atlantic row. But one of the things I'm really keen to show people is that you don't have to be the best and you don't have to be brilliant to go and tackle something like as extreme as rowing the Atlantic. I wasn't, none of us in the crew were. But it was more about your mindset and your attitude to it that determines the outcome than your talent or your size or your shape or your age or anything else. Anyone can go and do these things pretty much, if you've got the right attitude, the right mindset, that capacity and willingness to work hard, and if you're prepared to find people around who will help you with it. You don't have to go and do these things alone. It's not about working it out yourself. There are people who you can turn to. I think I've always been blessed with a reasonable level of self-confidence.
Why do you think that was?
Perhaps it's just through my upbringing. Parents giving me opportunities, supporting and encouraging me to go and try stuff. Through, I suppose, trying and failing at some things, but then learning how to pick myself up and keep going and having another go. But also, I suppose, doing reasonably well at most things, realising that if I put the effort in, I'll get the results at the end of it. And I think that's a really powerful lesson, that if you do work hard, it does pay off. You might still not be the fastest or the strongest or anything else, but you can exceed your perceived potential, So it's about starting to do things that I thought were beyond me and felt like a massive challenge, but the way that I prepared and I suppose faced those fears was to work really hard for them. And the marathon was a great example. When I first decided to do it, I remember waking up in the middle of the night with a cold sweat out of the fear of what on earth had I decided to do. But I channeled that fear into the preparation, and I got myself really fit. I followed a training program and I didn't miss a single day, and I exceeded my own expectations and other people's expectations of me. And that showed me that I could do things that I'd originally thought were potentially impossible, other people thought were a massive challenge. And I suppose each time you do that and push yourself and you realise you can do it, it gives you the confidence to go and try something else, potentially something bigger, something more scary, something more challenging. And I also realised how much personally that I get out of that. The pride in yourself that you get from achieving something that you thought was out of your reach. And it's really motivating when you feel that. That feeling of crossing the finishing line from that marathon was incredible. And I wanted to feel that again. My brother-in-law David, so my sister's husband, rode the Atlantic 2 years before we rode the Atlantic, and he had read a book about it when he was 7 years old, I think, and from that moment on it became, it was on his bucket list. He knew it was something he wanted to do, and he went on and did that. And when I first heard about him doing it, I thought he was mad. I just thought, why would you put yourself in a tiny little rowing boat in the middle of massive waves and massive ocean, hundreds of miles from anyone else? And I just thought he was bonkers. Didn't think that much more of it until the race started, and then I started following them and tracking them on social media. And following his journey and their updates just sort of it was so inspiring. They were clearly having an amazing time, and it just made it feel a lot more real. And then eventually seeing him finish the race, they crossed the line in the middle of the night for us here, and I sat in my bed upstairs watching on my iPad with my headphones in, and I just remember thinking it was just so spine-tinglingly exciting watching him crossing the finishing line. And I thought, wow, if I feel like that here in my bed thousands of miles away from it, what must it be like to be in that boat crossing the line and achieving something that so few people in the world will ever do? And at that moment I knew it was something that I wanted to do myself, but I sort of, with my rational head on, I thought, well, I can't do it now, the kids are too young, because at the time they were 2, 4 and 6. So I thought, well, maybe if I do it in 5 to 10 years when the children are older and a little bit more independent, but I'm not so old, I can't do it. And so that was the kind of the thinking that was going on in my mind. And then about a week later, or maybe 2 weeks later, Pip, my sister, called me and she said, Dids, I've got a boat. Do you want to row the Atlantic? And that's really how it all came about. And even though at that point the words that came out of my mouth were, of course I can't do it, and I reeled off a few excuses, I knew in my heart I was going to say yes. You know, I was getting this kind of glow and of excitement, knowing that there was this massive adventure about to happen. And when she called and she said, do you want to row the Atlantic? And I said, of course I can't. I said, you know, the kids are too young, I can't leave them for that long. And I said, I've just had a hip replacement. And she said, stop giving me reasons why you can't and start giving me reasons why you can. And you know, that just sunk in, and I realised that all of these things that I was telling her about, I can't do it because the kids are too young and I've just had a hip replacement. Well, the hip replacement wasn't an excuse to say no. It was actually my reason to say yes, because I'd struggled along for so many years with hip pain, but now I didn't have pain anymore. You know, it opened the door to challenges for me. It had given me a new lease of life physically again. And it was a reason to go and push myself and challenge myself and to test what this new ceramic hip could do. And I think just being able to switch my perspective and my mindset in that way with that simple language change was so powerful. And that reframing you can use in so many different ways. So you talked about, instead of why me, why not me? Well, that was my perspective on my cancer diagnosis. Because, you know, I was diagnosed just a few weeks after completing the Atlantic row, when I was fitter and stronger than I'd ever been in my life. You know, I'd felt completely invincible crossing the finishing line. Yet a few weeks later I was told I had advanced bowel cancer. And I think naturally our tendency is to then think, why me? You know, you think about the negatives and you think, woe is me. But actually using that power of reframing, I was able to turn it on its head and think, well, being young, fit and strong aren't reasons to think why me. They're actually reasons to think why not me. Because I'm lucky to be in this, you know, to look and feel healthy, to have physical strength on my side, and to be younger than most people are when they're diagnosed, because I can use those as my superpowers to get through this. And again, that just gave me the positive outlook to be able to tackle it in a very different way.
The reframing is almost down to, not entirely, but to some extent down to even just how you phrase it. It's like even words can just like...
Absolutely, it's just those tiny little extra words. So not, adding that not in completely changes it from why me to why not me. Or, you know, I can't do it, well, I can't do it yet. You know, and when you're taking on any kind of big challenge, on the whole, you don't know how you're going to do it. You don't have all of the tools in your toolbox to be able to complete the task. But it doesn't really matter. As long as you can take the first step, you can learn those things as you go along. So it's not about saying I can't do it. It's about saying I can't do it yet, but I'm going to find a way to make it happen. And that was certainly our approach to rowing the Atlantic. You know, we'd all rowed before at school, and two of the crew had rowed at university as well. but we'd never rowed an ocean rowing boat. And as we were to find out, it's a very different kettle of fish. And we quickly learned how much we had to learn. But that was fine. We had 2 years to get to learn what we needed to know, to prepare ourselves. And we managed to find people who could help us get there. And so it's absolutely not about being able to do it when you say you're going to do it. It's about finding the right people and being prepared to learn so that you can do it in the end.
But your brother-in-law knew how to do it.
He did, sort of.
That's a bit of...
They had a slightly different approach to training and preparation than we did. We prepared much more thoroughly.
Oh, did you?
Yes, 100%. Yes.
Yeah. But was that because he told you don't do it half-heartedly, or?
No, I wonder whether I think maybe we all feared it a bit more and therefore channeled that fear into our preparation. But I think there was also an element of being for middle-aged women, middle-aged mothers. Expectations of what we could achieve were fairly low. I think people generally thought we would probably give up at some point in our training because it was tricky. Or, the challenge of being mums and juggling, working with parenting and training to the Atlantic might just get too much for us, and we would throw in the towel. Or if we got there, if we made it to the start line and got going, we'd just sort of float in somewhere near the back of the fleet and give it a go. And I think we all want to challenge those perceptions about what we as midlife women were capable of doing. And therefore we worked so hard to get ourselves in the shapes of our lives and to make sure we knew exactly what we were doing. We were 100% prepared for whatever came our way so that we could rise to the challenge and exceed expectations, both our own expectations, but also the expectations of other people about what we could do. And actually it was quite funny because one of the other crews that rowed the Atlantic when we rowed the Atlantic, who we were very friendly with, had a lot of banter with, they actually shortly before race start offered to give us a lesson on one of the bits of technical navigation equipment on the boat, which we found quite amusing because we were just about to launch ourselves into 3,000 miles of ocean, and to think that we might not have known how the kit worked was amusing, let's say. And after a few weeks of rowing, when we were significantly further ahead than they were, they were slightly apoplectic with rage that we were ahead of them, and renamed us from the mothership to the motherfuckers, in a very nice way, I have to say. But that just goes to show we weren't expected to do very well.
They did beat you eventually.
No, we beat them. No, we beat them. Yeah.
I thought they caught up with you. Oh,
no, that was another female crew.
Oh, that was another
the other female, another female four that just nudged ahead of us at the end. But it was this was a male crew who I think couldn't quite fathom how a crew of midlife mums were ahead of them in the race. Yeah, we had a particularly eventful 3 or 4 day, or maybe it was 2 or 3 day outing in our training. We were based out of Gosport Marina, and it's fairly difficult to navigate around there. There's a lot of boats, including massive ferries going in and out, and we were this tiny little ocean rowing boat. And it had been an eventful few days with, almost ricocheting from one potential disaster to another. We nearly grounded the boat in sort of marshland. We went hurtling down a channel in the middle of the night, completely out of control, narrowly missing parked boats. And then we'd really struggled. We decided we were going out into the Solent for another kind of trip, but we didn't time it very well with the tides, and we found ourselves playing piggy in the middle with two ferries, one coming from the Isle of Wight, one coming out of Gosport Marina, which was fairly scary. And those massive boats were creating enormous waves, which meant we couldn't get any traction in the water. We couldn't steer to avoid them. And we ended up being towed back into harbour by a police boat, which was fairly humiliating. And when they got us to safety and kind of set us onto one of the pontoons, one of the policemen said to us, "Girls, you look exhausted. We think you ought to give it a rest now." And Joe, one of the crew, turned around and said, "Well, this is just what we always look like. We're just mums. This is what mums look like." And that amused us all, but really set the tone. And we got back in the boat and we carried on. I think being a parent, well, it's a combination of being a parent and getting to kind of midlife, your 40s, your 50s. You've had a lot of life experience. You've had lots of knocks and downs that you've had to pick yourself up from and get through. As a working mum, working parent, but you're very used to juggling and having lots of things going on all at the same time. And I think being a mum in particular was actually tremendously helpful when it came to rowing the Atlantic, because one of the big challenges for most crews is sleep deprivation. Because you row, for example, as a crew of 4, your typical shift pattern is to row 2 hours on, 2 hours off, 24 hours a day. And that means that the maximum sleep you have at any one point in time is 90 minutes. And you've got to wake, you've got to get up several times every night to get on the oars for 2 hours. And that is tough. But I think as women who, between us we had 11, we've still got them all. We have 11 children. We were used to getting up several times during the night from our experience of, breastfeeding children. And so it wasn't something that worried us because we knew we could do it. We knew our bodies would just keep going because they just do. You learn to adapt to that kind of routine. And so I think psychologically and physically, it was a huge advantage having been through parenthood, particularly as mothers, when approaching that kind of thing, whereas some of the younger crews were really frightened by it and just didn't know if they could do it and struggled, whereas I didn't really struggle at all with getting up in the middle of the night, time after time, every night. Do you know, and it's a real lesson. It's amazing how much the body can endure. I mean, ideally, you don't want that forevermore, but you do, having been through it, you do know that you can keep going. You might not be in your best shape ever. Your patience might be tested, but you can keep going because the body will keep going if it needs to.
Felicity, tell me about the getting across the Atlantic. I mean, to my mind, I've spoken to you about it before, but you get to a point where whichever way you look, it's going to be well over 1,000 miles either way.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you had a rescue. Where was the rescue launch? Was it like about 20 miles away or 50 miles away?
No, there isn't really a rescue launch. No. People assume that there's sort of a boat somewhere nearby that will come and scoop you up if you need help, but there isn't. There are 2 what they call safety boats, I think, but they might be a week away from you, literally hundreds of miles away. So one kind of tracks the back of the fleet, and the other one works its way up the fleet, really just to take photos, but we didn't see either of them at all. And so when you're rowing, you might be many days from the nearest other boat of any description at all. So if something goes wrong, if you're kind of further than a couple of days from shore either side, then it's the nearest other boat that will come to your rescue. So there's kind of protocol that you follow, and it might be a cargo ship on its way to Canada that comes to get you, hopefully comes to get you. So there is no backup or support really. You're entirely self-sufficient on your boat, so you have everything that you need to cope with any scenario that happens.
The sea is very scary, isn't it?
It can be, yeah.
Tell me, were there any moments when you really did experience that kind of the icy grip of nearby death on your soul? Were there any kind of, or were you always kind of, no, we're Did you ever think about that?
Yeah, we did. There were a few nights when it was really hairy. It was like being on a white knuckle roller coaster ride, particularly when there was no moon and it was pitch black, because you could hear the storm raging around you, but you couldn't see anything, and you didn't know whether the waves were going to come at you from left, right, front, back, or which way the boat was about to tilt. And almost any wave could have been the wave to knock you down, to turn the boat over, or to tip you front over back, which was almost the worst scenario. So I just remember each shift when it was like that, gripping the oars tightly, literally making the knuckles white, and it being a bit of an endurance event, just thinking, I've got to get through the next 2 hours. And then the sigh of relief when you crawl into the cabin afterwards, still alive. Ironically, the cabin is probably the worst place to be when you're in conditions like that. It's much better to be on deck, but it still feels when you get back in like some kind of safety blanket being wrapped around you. But I don't think I never remember feeling worried about my life, because we were always tethered on, and you are, through your training, it's indoctrinated in you that you have to be tethered to the boat at all times, because that's the thing that will save you if you capsize. So I don't think we ever felt worried about our life. It was more just the adrenaline rushing, I think, and not being able to see what was going on in the middle of the night.
Yeah. Because you don't want to be run down by a large oil tanker, do you?
No, that would be a terrible way to go.
Well, it'd be quick, wouldn't it? You'd hear a rumble, I guess, early on. Yeah,
I mean, the boats, we do have they're fitted with equipment to try to avoid that scenario. So we have something called an AIS system, which does alert you to boats if they come within a certain radius of your boat. But actually, it's very frightening when that alarm goes off, because then you think we're on collision course or something. And that did happen to us twice on about our third night. There was the first time there was a yacht that was coming closer and closer, and it was on a direct collision course with us, and it wasn't responding to our radio calls, and eventually we had to send it up a white flare, which fortunately it did see, and then it diverted. And the second time was 2 or 3 hours later, when there was a Spanish naval ship which wasn't showing up on our AIS system, but we could see these lights of a much bigger boat getting closer and closer and closer. And in that scenario, eventually we had to put out an anonymous radio call, which was picked up by their captain, and they did then change course to avoid us. But that was quite frightening, because you thought, we're about to become fish food. Yeah.
Maybe it was stealth. Maybe it was a stealth ship.
Exactly.
Again, I know I've asked this question to you before, but how did you get to sleep? How did you force, because you needed the sleep. So how did you make yourself go to sleep?
Without any problem at all, to be honest. I think generally you're so exhausted that you do just fall asleep. And I was very disciplined about sleeping as much as I possibly could, because the effect of cumulative sleep deprivation over that length of time can be debilitating. So I was very good at sleeping in every off shift, daytime and nighttime. So I would always make sure I got my 90 minutes in each off shift during the night, but then I would always nap in each of my daytime shifts as well, because I knew that just picking away at your sleep was so important. But it was also felt, as a mum of young children, it just felt like such a luxury to be able to go to sleep several times every day in the middle of the day. And there was also something about the gentle rocking motion of the boat, which just, I think, helped me get to sleep.
Really?
Yeah. So I didn't really struggle with sleeping. The only night I struggled to sleep was actually the night we didn't row at all, because the waves were so massive that every time we put our oars into the water, it slowed us down. So we decided that night not to row because it was counterproductive. And there was something about maybe it was the lack of physical exertion combined with the excitement of not rowing that stopped me sleeping that night. But that's the only night I struggled. My sister was the only one out of our crew that was actually seasick, and she did suffer quite badly for about 48 hours. Just she'd be rowing along and then have to put the oars down to be sick over the side, and then you just have to carry on. But that's something that you expect.
What's a seasickness patch? What's that?
It's a patch that you wear behind your ear. I don't really know what it does, but it seemed to be effective. The downside was that it does start to affect your vision. So having worn it for several days, I couldn't really focus on anything. So I couldn't read any copy, for example, when I was in the cabin.
Well, what you would try to read, would you?
And then couldn't see the words. Yeah. It sort of blurred the vision, which was sort of okay when you're on deck and you didn't need to do anything close up. But yeah, that's one of the side effects of the seasickness patches. But, a cross worth bearing to avoid actually feeling sick.
I can't imagine you. What book do you take on a rowing?
Well, we took Kindles, but I never used it once. But it was more. I think I was actually trying to read the instructions for the seasickness patches, and I couldn't read them. It's because you've got a load of batteries and stuff down there. Yes.
Yeah, so you've got power.
Yes.
Oh, come on. There you go.
Yeah, solar panels on the boat.
You've got a TV set.
No. I mean, in theory, you could take. I suppose you could take. In theory, you could. Yeah. So we had the boats were powered by solar panels.
Of course, yeah.
But then there's lots of different bits of equipment that require power, and so it's quite strict in terms of the order in which you are able to use your equipment, depending on how much power you've got left. So the water maker was the essential piece of equipment that is quite power intensive, and so that's the one thing that you need to keep working every day to enable you to desalinate the seawater and have enough water to drink, and then navigation equipment and things like that you need to keep going. So things like Kindles and phones are all luxuries that you only charge if it's flawed, morning, noon and night sunshine, and you've got plenty of power in the batteries.
Did time pass quickly?
Yes and no. I don't think it felt like 6 weeks of being at sea doing the same thing day in, day out. But there were shifts when time just seemed to stand still. Probably more so towards the end of the race. It was incredibly hot, and sometimes our shifts around lunchtime when it was so hot and the sea state was difficult, those shifts seemed to just go on for eternity. Equally, in the first half of the race, we had quite calm conditions, and then it was like rowing through treacle. And then again, some of the shifts just seemed to go on forever, and we didn't seem to be making much progress. But I think generally, and maybe this is, rose-tinted glasses, it didn't feel like 6 weeks of rowing endlessly.
Would you do it again?
100%. Yeah, I'd love to do it again. It was such a privilege to have the opportunity to do something that so few people ever get to do, and to take that time out of busy, normal life just to experience something completely unique, to be in that environment when all you really have to think about is yourself and the 3 people around you, and the very simple routine of eat, sleep, row, repeat. There was something just amazing about the simplicity of that existence, and just learning how to be, and just to be very comfortable in that very simple environment, and to start observing things that are going on around you, whether it's the changing patterns of the clouds in the sky, or the different colours of the sea, or to, just the conversations that you can have with people and the connections that you form, where the pace of normal life doesn't allow that ordinarily. You don't. For example, had so many amazing conversations with my sister that would never happen in normal everyday life when we've got 7 children between us who are all kind of competing for time and attention. And having that time and that opportunity to get to know each other on a very different level was so special.
For example, what do you talk about in the middle of the ocean that might be too personal, actually, this is a question, but I'll try it. What do you talk about in the middle of the ocean that you wouldn't talk about in normal life?
Oh, everything from playing really stupid games like the ABC of sandwich fillings, or the ABC of film titles, or the ABC of past conquests, boyfriends, you name it, we played it. Those things you don't normally do as adults in normal life. But through to much more deep and meaningful conversations about what's the meaning of life, you know, politics, how do you solve world peace? It went from very shallow conversations, the inane, things that got us laughing, belly laughing, to much more serious conversations around, you know, personal motivations, what makes you tick, you know, family relationships, all manner of different things, because you have time to explore every single avenue you can possibly think of.
Did you argue?
On the whole, no. And actually that was one of the values that kept us together, I think. We had a crew mantra which was stay safe, stay friends, and stay strong. And those 3 things guided every decision we made and how we approached the entire event. But staying friends was so important for us because we knew how much not only we had sacrificed to do this, but everyone around us had sacrificed for us to be able to do this. And to do it at the expense of relationships would have been an absolute travesty, and to have had a miserable time doing it would have felt like a travesty. And so we want to do everything possible to stay friends through the crossing. And it's quite unusual, actually. Most people end up falling out, you know, with one or other crew member because of, I suppose, the pressure of what you're doing and the extremes that you're putting yourself through. Tempers do fray. But the way we approached it was to avoid that at all cost. Now, that's not to say there wasn't a crossword during the crossing. There were, in particular, 2 occasions when it did blow up between 2 of the crew. But I think, to everyone's credit, we got through those times, and together we kind of we regrouped as a crew and we came through it.
I seem to remember, forgive me if this isn't quite true, but I do think it is true, that when Ben Fogle and James Cracknell rode across the Atlantic or some ocean somewhere, didn't they fall out?
They did.
Big time. Maybe it's when there's just 2 of you, you hate each other's guts for a while. Yeah.
They did fall out, and I remember watching their documentary, and I think, I mean, obviously I wasn't there and I don't know the ins and the outs of it, but to a large degree it's down to your alignment on, you know, what are your aims and objectives from the race or the expedition, and I don't think they were aligned in terms of how they were approaching it. So I think James Cracknell wanted to go as fast as possible and, you know, win the race, or certainly go as fast as they could as a pair. I don't think that had been discussed necessarily, and I don't think that was what Ben Fogle wanted out of it, and I think that causes friction. So through our preparation and our training, we spent a lot of time actually talking about how we wanted to approach it and what were our aims and objectives, so that we were aligned on that, so it didn't cause us problems during the crossing. And I think, you know, in many ways that comes down to our professional backgrounds in terms of how do you build, you know, a strong functioning team, and how do you make sure you are all aligned behind your objectives. We didn't reject anyone, but we were very careful about who we let in the first place. So when crew members changed, and there were a few changes, it was down to individual circumstances rather than there being any kind of falling out with the rest of the crew. But I think, you know, it's so important that you choose your crewmates carefully, and that you then spend a lot of time working on crew dynamics and relationships and knowing each other inside out before you embark on something like that. Because it is an extreme environment. Tempers will fray, you're exhausted, emotions are up and down, physically you're up and down, and so you have to have strategies and methods to get through that as a crew together.
And you said you talked about that beforehand.
Yeah.
You prepared for getting texture with each other and things going wrong and stuff.
Yeah, so we did things like personality profiling, which gave us a really solid understanding of how we would each react in different circumstances and how, the best way of communicating with each other. Some people prefer the softly approach, some people are much more direct, but it also meant that you kind of made allowances for people responding and reacting in different ways, because you knew that was just them. It wasn't anything personal, it was just them. So that definitely helped.
That's so interesting, isn't it, from a corporate perspective? Like before you even get into any kind of team, profile each other and work out what the hell's going to happen before it happens.
And that's something that we learned from our corporate backgrounds. I'd done insights profiling from several times in my career, and that's exactly what we did as a crew. But it wasn't just tools like that. There were just simple things we did, like ask each other, well, what motivates you? Or if you're having a bad day, how can I help you through that? What do you need from me to give you a boost? And those may sound simple, but actually they're really important. So I knew that Pip, my sister, just needed a hug. If she was having a bad day, that's what she needs. Whereas Lebby, one of the others, it was a cup of tea. And I talk about this when I speak, but those are things that we put into practice during the row itself. And I remember I was on shift and my sister came out of her cabin to go on shift one day. And I could tell just by the way she held her shoulders that she was feeling low. And so when she sat down in front of me to pick up her oars, I put mine down and I leant forward and I gave her a hug. And that just made her feel seen and valued and understood, because she knew that I'd seen how she was feeling. But I also knew how to give her a boost. And as simple gestures like that can make a massive difference when you're in that kind of situation. And equally, Lebby had a really bad night on the oars where she'd fallen asleep several times. She was kicking herself for it. She was giving herself a hard time. And so I came out a little bit ahead of my shift and made her a cup of tea that she could then have when she was on her off shift. And again, it sounds like a small thing. Actually making a cup of tea on a boat that's doing this is not that simple, but again, it made her feel seen and heard and valued. That's really interesting, because so the important thing there in what you've said is in all that little interaction, it's the bit I think is the most important is the first bit where you said, I had seen. I'd seen it. Unless you see that person come out, you said she was a bit down, she was, shoulders down, head down, whatever. Unless you see it in somebody, then you can't understand it, you can't influence it, and you can't ultimately thrive. Very interesting, that. And that's about being tuned in to people, understanding them, or just, that actually listening, active listening, not just, parrot fashion. Not going through the motions. Exactly.
Something you've said again in the book, where you go, I'd done these triathlons and I'd done the Atlantic and I'd had a hip replacement, and you hadn't done Everest by that time, but you'd done all this stuff, and you said that was the taster for what was to come now. And then,
as I was lying in the operating theatre while they were completing the procedure, after I'd been told that there was a tumour and it was cancer, one of the senior consultants came in, and she was putting a cannula in my arm so that I could then go and have a CT scan. And she said, look, you rode the Atlantic, this is just your next challenge, and you just need to approach this with the same determination and courage that got you across the Atlantic, she said, and you'll be fine. And they'd been talking, in my pre-op the nurse that was doing my observation said, "You're really fit. Well, how are you so fit?" So I sort of sheepishly said, "Well, I've just rode the Atlantic."
As you do.
As you do. And so I think then that was the topic of conversation amongst the, the medical staff, which is how she knew I'd rode the Atlantic. And I don't know if she knew quite how impactful her words would be, but I thought she's so right. And that was exactly what I needed to hear at that point, minutes, seconds after being told I had cancer. And I thought, she is right. I know that I am both physically and mentally resilient, tough as old boots. I've just rode the Atlantic. It's, it's one of the toughest physical and mental challenges out there. I've done that. I just need to apply the same approach to this next challenge. Yes, it's a different challenge, but it will require physical and mental resilience, and I know I can do it. So that was the first one. And then not long after that, when I was in recovery after the procedure, the nurse that was looking after me looked at my toenails, which were painted because I was due to go to London that night to attend the rowing award ceremony for the Atlantic Row with my crewmates. And she looked at my toenails and she said, "Oh, your nails look pretty. What's that for?" And I said, "Well, I was supposed to be going to this awards thing tonight for the Atlantic Row, but I said, I suppose I won't be going now." And she said, "Well, why not?" She said, "Nothing has changed physically between you walking in here this morning and now." So she said, "You can deal with this tomorrow or the next day or the next day. You can deal with this when you need to deal with this. But there is no reason that you can't go tonight. And rightly so, enjoy the moment." And I thought, again, she's so right.
Yeah.
At some point, cancer will, in all likelihood, stop me doing things, and it may well take everything away from me. But right now, it doesn't have to take this away from me. And so I did. I went home from hospital, got my glad rags on, and went and enjoyed the celebration with my crewmates.
I guess mortality will take something away from us all eventually. It's the inevitable thing, isn't it? I guess it's the delay of the control of your destiny that I guess is the frustrating bit.
Yeah.
You said something about you didn't like the idea that you would now have a sign over your head, around your neck, saying, "I've got cancer."
Yeah, you suddenly, it becomes, people almost apply this new identity to you. It becomes a label that is affixed to you, that slightly takes over from whoever you were before, even if you don't want it to. And I think cancer, we all have this stereotype of people with cancer who've lost their hair and look gaunt and grey and everything else. And I just didn't want to be that person. Now, I think I was very lucky with my treatment that my chemotherapy wasn't the kind of chemo that makes you lose your hair. And so to all intents and purposes, I did look normal during my treatment. And I think that for me was really important, because it meant that if I didn't tell people, nobody needed to know, and I could carry on not as normal, because I was operating within the confines of treatment and surgery and chemo, but people didn't have to know. And I did try and keep going as much as possible in a normal way.
Yeah. When you were having your chemo, did you feel as though at a kind of a pseudo or an entirely spiritual level, there was something evil, as in the poison, entering your body? Did you feel it at that visceral spiritual level? Yeah,
it's very odd sitting in a chemo chair, rigged up to the drips, and thinking, that's poison that they're sticking in me now, and you almost feel it, the poison dripping around your body. Do you? Do you literally feel it? You do feel it. Do you? It feels it's like ice running through your veins. Yeah.
What colour is it?
Clear. It's clear liquid. Yeah, and it's odd, almost voluntarily putting your arm up there, having a needle put in, and allowing someone to poison you. But then you've got to, take the rational approach and thinking, yes, it's poisoning me, but it's poisoning the bad stuff. That's why, you've got to see almost the greater good in this, in what you're putting yourself through. And also what is quite hard to get your head around is that you could be feeling actually quite fit and healthy, but you're about to spiral down because of the poison, not because of the illness itself. And so the side effects of chemo are far, on the whole, a lot worse than anything you felt before because of the cancer. When I was diagnosed, I didn't know what my treatment would look like. After my surgery, you don't know what your staging is until after they've done the biopsies on the tumour and after your surgery. So I found out maybe 2.5 weeks after surgery that the cancer had spread into the lymph nodes, and that determined that I would go down the chemotherapy route.
As opposed to
just surgery.
Okay.
Had it not spread, it would have just been a case of taking out the mass and done and dusted. So that then meant that I was then on this chemo journey, chemo path. But in many ways I welcomed that, even though I knew it was going to significantly extend my treatment. And even though the stage 3 diagnosis had meant that the cancer was more advanced, it felt to me, I was pleased that they were going to throw the book at it in terms of treatment and, give me the heavy stuff, because it felt like I was doing everything I possibly could to stop the cancer coming back. And so I almost welcomed the poison, because it was a way of hitting it hard and doing my utmost to beat it, as opposed to a more gentle approach, which should have just been surgery.
Yeah. So the framing, to use that word again, is you actually framed it as me versus it kind of thing. There was a competitive scenario that you had.
Yeah.
What did you learn in that time?
I suppose more about my resilience. And actually I learned a lot about the mind-body connection. And so what I turned to through my treatment was exercise and staying as fit and strong as I possibly could. And I was an anomaly, I think, in terms of cancer patients. But I carried on running. I'd had major abdominal surgery, so I couldn't do strength and conditioning training, which I enjoyed doing, but I could walk a lot and I could run. And I did that through rehab after surgery, and then continued that through my chemotherapy as well. And I was an anomaly. People thought I was bonkers. Even I had a PICC line in my arm to dispense the chemo drugs. So I had 2 different sorts of chemo, and the second one was over 48 hours, which I'd have at home. And even when I was having the chemo drip, I would be out running, because it was a way for me, it was sort of my anchor. It was a way of retaining some kind of control over my life that had been turned upside down. But it was also, it helped me psychologically, because I thought, well, if I'm still out here running, if I can still fit and strong enough to do that, then surely I'm going to be okay. So it was that kind of physical fitness that helped keep me mentally fit as well. And that's something I'm really passionate about now. It's that, maintaining that element of control, but that mind-body connection and keeping yourself physically strong has such an impact on your mental health as well, which isn't just the case going through, illness or cancer treatment, but it can be the same if you're struggling in any way in life. And so that was probably my, almost my anchor and my superpower through my treatment. I think it was that determination and willingness to stay fit and active because of the benefits from a mental health perspective, but also it was giving me the best possible chance of tolerating the chemo, but also in my head of beating the cancer. You are faced with your own mortality. There was a period of about 5 days when I didn't know if it was terminal or not. And suddenly you realise how short and precious life is. And you don't really get that perspective without something like a potentially terminal diagnosis. Yes. And it's that almost visceral need now to make the most of every opportunity that comes along, to go and find opportunities, because you never know what's around the corner. I could never have imagined a cancer diagnosis when I, rode across that finishing line, but that's what happened. So it has given me this fresh perspective and a different purpose, yeah.
And then you went to Everest.
Yes, to mark my 3-year anniversary of my cancer diagnosis, yeah.
Oh, it was that?
Yeah, it was during the trek up to base camp, 20th of May, which was 3 years since I heard those words, yeah.
Is Everest full of like litter and discarded bottles and trash?
There is an element of that, but they're working very hard to reverse that. So every trekker is given a bag to collect the litter as you go along and to make sure that you don't leave any footprint yourself. I think they make a meal of it in the media. It's not as bad as, I don't think it's as bad as people make out.
Okay. And
it is still extraordinarily beautiful. It's so inspirational as a place to go.
Why?
Because suddenly, just the awe of the mountains, and almost it gives you a sense of how insignificant you are in the general scheme of the world around you. And it's just so incredibly beautiful. It feels like the mountains are alive around you. You hear them, the creaking of the ice moving, the rumble of avalanches around you. Yeah, incredible. It gives you a sense of your place in the universe, I think.
Felicity Ashley, thank you so much for doing this.
It's
wonderful
my
to talk to you.
pleasure.
And do you want to do a promo for the book?
Well, this is my debut book, I suppose. That's not necessarily to say there's another one coming, but it's really a very personal account of my story through adventure, adversity, and life beyond that. With the lessons that I've learned, and I hope it offers other people some lessons for whatever challenges they might be facing in life, because we all face challenges, personal challenges, professional challenges, emotional challenges, and I think we do all have the strength to get through them, but sometimes we don't have the belief.